just imagine what you can do in building with others. That will unlock so many things in your world. It will unlock your dreams and accelerate and amplify things like you wouldn't believe. It's just amazing.
Top leaders, meaningful conversation, actionable advice, bulldoze complacency, ignite inspiration, create impact. Produced by Southwestern family of companies. This is the Action Catalyst.
Are you interested in advertising with the Action Catalyst? Our listeners could be hearing about your brand right here, right now. For details, shoot us an email at info@theactioncatalyst.com.
Hello, Action Catalyst listeners. This is Adam Outland. Today's guest is Chris Deaver, co-founder of Bravecore, helping leaders be more creative and creatives be better leaders. With time spent at Apple, Disney, Dell, and working alongside Stephen Covey, Deaver brings his experiences together in the book Brave Together, which we'll dive into today.
Chris, great to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks, Adam.
Are you in West Coast?
I'm in the Bay Area, so San Jose, south part of it, a little town called Gilroy that's the garlic capital of the world.
Garlic capital of the world.
Yeah, that's our claim at least. And I can vouch for the garlic fries, but the garlic ice cream, don't ask me about. I don't have anything good to say. So.
Oh man, well I'd actually love to start maybe a little bit earlier in life. Was it one of your first professional experiences to work with Stephen Covey back in the day?
Yeah, that was my kind of dream. I listened to his audio tape of the 7 Habits. I had a Walkman, so this will date me. Sony, it was a classic. I'd go for a jog or a run, and I had the 7 Habits tape, and I just listened to it constantly, to the point that it literally broke. I think it was like 1,000 times, and I just couldn't get enough. I thought, this is the coolest thing. It's about principles, it's inspiring, and it translates into business and personal development. And I thought, that's where I want to be. I want to be in that space. And so. Fast forward, I had the chance to connect with Stephen himself. I was at BYU, and he has connections there and lived in Provo. So, it all kind of happened just, I guess I'd say randomly. I was very intentional, but it was kind of a backdoor in. His son had it was like a network marketing business meeting at his house. And my friend said, "Hey, this is your chance." Like I said, "I'm not interested in signing up for some random thing." And he goes, "No, but it's at Stephen Covey's house." It's like, okay, so cool. So I end up walking up the stairs, this nice big house, and I look down the hallway and I see this bald guy. I'm like, older guy. I thought, there's only one of those around here, but I'm not going to chase him in his own house. That's a little awkward, right? So I kind of step towards the front door, and I look at the garage. And he pops out of the garage, and I think his wife, he and his wife are going to a Christmas party or something. So he's putting gifts in the car, and I walk over, and I just thought, okay, now's my chance. And I said, "Hey, Stephen, I really appreciated your books, but they've made a difference in my life." And he looks me in the eyes really deeply, and he goes, "We've met before." And I said, "I feel like I have. I've read your books that much that I feel like I know you." And he goes, "No, we've met before." And oddly enough, I had a dream years before about us meeting, and I don't know. Sometimes these things just happen for a reason, and you just connect. But from there, we had him come speak at an event, and we started. As we were doing this mentoring nonprofit, he said, "I'll be your PR agent." He started spreading the word, and he endorsed our work, and it was great. I learned a lot from him. One of the things he said that's always stuck with me, that I'm striving to work on to this day. He said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's the right proportion for listening." So that's my introductory work with Covey.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, how much of that influence do you feel like carried over to what you do today with Bravecore and, the book that you wrote, Brave Together?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of inherent wisdom in questions. And I think especially needed in the world today, right? We're inundated with answers. Google is like, every tool has answers, right? Spitting out answers for us. And we have to kind of cut through this noise. And then in our interactions with others, this is something that both Covey, I had the chance to be at Apple, and Steve Jobs would do this in meetings. He'd listen a lot. He would pivot and start to disagree with himself at times, and people would get confused by this. So, well, you're CEO, like you had a position, and he'd say, "Well, no, this answer is better," right? So a 180, and that's the power of listening. Ed Catmull, who started Pixar, also. His dilemma was he's a really smart guy, had PhD, and he said when in the early days of the company, he would just fire off answers to questions everybody had. We had the chance to meet with him, and we thought he's the Yoda, right, of creativity and principles, Creativity Inc. that has a Covey flavor to it, but it's specific to Pixar's principles of their culture, right? And so we thought, well, this guy's Yoda. We're going to click the wisdom button, and he's just going to dispense, the wisdom. And he didn't. So we ended up sitting there, my friend, co-author, and I, and we're just sharing, and he's listening and asking really great questions. This goes on for 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes. And at one point I'm thinking, wow, this is okay. It was an interesting dynamic. So I paused and I said, Ed, what's your leadership philosophy? And he said that. He said, I lead with a question. And I think as we come upon this time, especially, all these technologies, AI, and all these tools and things that are coming at us, well, there's a unique opportunity to unlock the power of questions. And at Pixar, Ed and team, they would send out a question a week in advance. So rather than an agenda, they would send out a question to just let that marinate. Creates that space. There's much more anchoring power in questions.
Yeah, it's actually harder to come up with the right questions first than to work on the answers, right?
Definitely. But yeah, the feeling, and definitely the business world, to this day, it's a struggle, or it's a wrestle, is, and we call it in the book, the expert model, right? There's an expert model of, it's a temptation to kind of show up and kind of say dump expertise, but, put answers, kind of pour answers into the people or into the conversation. And, and in a world where there are so many answers, it does beg that question of, well, how do we unlock the space for people to be brave? I saw this at Apple, where you had, people that had written white papers that like nobody else had done it, right? Their whole PhD was about this technical aspect of something. And yet they would come to the table with kind of egos off the table, a humility to the universe, an unanswered question, right? That they had to kind of come together to pull something out of the ether with a belief that could happen, and something that didn't exist prior to that meeting, that they were bringing their perspective and others were bringing theirs, but that the magic would happen. And essentially, something that would be a revelation.
Yeah. And you had such a career, being senior HR leadership at Walt Disney and Apple. And as a teenager in high school, like how much of this did you predict was going to be your life path?
I was just trying to make it through, survive. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I imagined exactly this course. I knew something about, I enjoyed creativity. I also would find myself in those places thinking kind of commercially or about the business world. And, behind all of this in the background, my foundation had started, I'd say, really, my dad was a scoutmaster, so the Boy Scout program forever. And I just started, I begged to go on these big trips, but, 15-mile hikes and these things where I didn't realize at the time, but I'm observing a version of leadership, right? Among these kids who are like trying to figure this out, and they have these responsibilities. Hey, patrol leader, go build it, put a tent together, go find, make a fire, and all the messiness of that. And, my dad, he was pretty good at like, just, okay, go figure it out. The other dynamic that happened for me was I was on an achievement orientation path. I did everything to get Eagle Scout at 12. I, was into, grades, and even in college, I studied animation at BYU. This is a precursor to them becoming, they're recognized now as really one of the best in the world at that. But this was like the first class. But I got there and I wrote a letter to Roy Disney. I wanted to work at Disney, and I get a call from a recruiter. I didn't know this was going to happen. 3 or 4 months later, I forgot about the letter, but this recruiter calls and says, "Hey, this is Lisa. Roy said to talk to you." And there's like pixie dust flying everywhere. I've wished upon a star, and it's actually happening, right? And all those things, all those achievements in my life, it all led to this moment, right? It was the weirdest thing to actually have my heart override this, where I said thank you, and I ended up hanging up the phone. It was an existential moment that I realized, hey, right company, it's part of a dream, but that's not right now. It's not what you need. And it was a shock to my system. Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't understand it. But what I'll say is, hey, achievement is great. We all have a baseline of fear, right? Conscious, subconscious, in work or life. And it may be in the territories that are new for us, that are unexplored, some unknown, right? And this happens on a daily basis. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen with this. Sometimes it's financial. Maslow's kind of hierarchy. It's like, well, I don't know how I'm going to make that work. We break out of that by being brave. And in the achievement world, that can turn into hacks and hustles and just optimization of what, how good can we get? But what I learned and what the focus of this book is that there's a higher order approach, which is being brave together. And that when we unlock that shared dream or shared future, just magic happens.
Yeah. So obviously you had some self-belief and self-confidence in your value and your worth to, I guess, existentially say that wasn't the right time. But where do you feel like you developed your self-worth and value to teach this? Like, where did that come from?
That's a great question. It's a really great question. I think it's innate. I have great parents. I love a lot. Grandparents, people have been encouraging in my life. And my dad was an engineer. And to his credit, the other thing that he would do, it was very co-creative. I didn't know at the time, but I'd have an idea for something, and these are crazy ideas. Like, I want to build a Spider-Man suit, or I want to create a hovercraft. And it's easy for a dad to blow that off. You're like, okay, or just, oh, that's nice, But he'd actually sit with me and start to design whatever it was. And actually, we'd start to build those things. So it became real, and it became an experience where it's like, wow, you can actually come up with a thought, start to shape it together, and bring it to life.
So there's some good parenting wisdom in that too, for all the parents listening. Do stuff with your kids because it makes a tremendous impact.
Yeah, I think so. I think for leaders too and managers is we have this dilemma where we look at it as such a box of employer-employee. And then that's so easy when we think in those terms, right? Like Covey would say, to change people's behavior, change their perception of their role, right? But so often this employer-employee relationship in our minds dictates that, well, we've got to behave. Then it's very kind of disciplinary or performance-oriented and results-based, which just honing in on orientation only or achievement only, it doesn't really motivate or inspire. But it begs the question of what if, right? The what if is, what if leaders, what if managers saw themselves as co-creators? And what if they saw their employees as co-creators? And so when they have those ideas, and one of the best leaders that I ever had, he would say, what if you're in my shoes for a day? Like, what would you do? He really honestly wanted to know, and usually it's something I was wrestling with. I'd say, well, this is what I'm trying to figure out. I'd solve it this way. And then he'd take that idea in the air and just start to, shape it with me. And then he would go that direction and say, well, let's do that then. And I thought, wow, really? That's the simplicity and the power of co-creation.
Reminds me of the principle of buy-in, right? Like you take that approach to organizational leadership, and a powerful vision is a shared vision. And so you're equipping people to have their fingerprints on whatever it is that's being done. And so the buy-in is going to be infinitely higher.
Definitely.
One of your co-creation principles is turn pain into power.
Yeah, I think that one, more than any other, was most applicable. The world teaches a lot that, no pain, no gain. And I think that fits in kind of the brave alone category. And I'd say there's nothing wrong with it. Well, that could lead to burnout. And I think we've seen that, right, in the pandemic and some of the fallout from that and where people have readjusted, their lives. But yeah, more specifically for me, if I were to pick a company that really had the pain, I showed up at Dell and I was fresh off my getting my MBA, out of that mentoring network. And this was before, Disney or Apple. As far as a business professional context, I wanted to go to those companies, but, they didn't give me the time of day. They were on my dream list. So I kind of shelved that. I thought, what's available? And Dell was a big company. They'd had some success. Of course, I didn't know. I got in the organization. This is about 2008, give or take. And the 3 or 4 VPs, SVPs that hired me, they were gone in 3 or 4 months. There was constant rounds of layoffs happening every 3 to 4 to 6 months, massive. And the stock price, tanked down to like a quarter of what it was. And Dell had grown in numbers as over the prior years before that, as far as business and growth with the PC direct model. But what had started to happen was that got deteriorated as other companies like Apple took that approach. I show up there and I'm asking all these existential questions. I realized wow, this company's got some problems. But what I also realized was, to Dell's credit, what they're good at and what Michael's particularly good at is being extremely resilient and extremely open to even criticism, right? And so I formed a team and we started to look at these questions and wrestle with, what does this mean as it relates to a hopeful future? And if there is a hopeful future for Dell, how do you start to build that? And what are the elements required for us to get there? And so when we looked at holistically at what direct model as a business model had meant, it turned into a leadership model at Dell. And so we had to empower innovation. They had to approach, going back to the lead with the question. And so we realized that there has to be a shift here. And the pain, so that was the pain, right? Talk about pain. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, this is existential. The sky is falling. We may not have a Dell, right, in a few years. And so this team, we started to shape what that future could be. You know, they had a target of wanting to be $200 billion company. I said, this isn't going to happen if we have the state of flow that we have. We have to shift how the culture operates. And to ground that in an anchoring question, we positioned this as what we called the connect model, which was empowering innovation, listen first, and keep those things that work, right? Keep execution, that's good, right? But do it in a contextual way that's with others. And think about it as a platform, right? How do you connect dots with each other as a leader, right? In your teams, and then also with partnerships. I sent this to Michael, and the long story short, I show up in my manager's office, and she's like, "What was this email to Michael?" And I said, "Well, he was in all hands. He said he wants ideas, right? We're struggling. We have some challenges as a company, and he asked for ideas." And she goes, "Well, they say that sometimes, but they don't really." I took him on his word. The next day, Michael at 5 a.m. sends a response, and he says, "Huge respect for this initiative. What are the next steps?" We started a think tank called Game Changers, where they would submit ideas, kind of a Shark Tank type experience. And $1 billion ideas came out of this. People that had just been in the company, nobody asked, right? Nobody ever asked, like, "Hey, do you think you could build something else?" Or so a mobile app emerged out of this $1 billion idea, other things. But what happened was the culture started to shift. They were able to turn that pain into power, and it took a collective approach to do it. It was shared.
Follow true north is one of your other principles. I feel that what you meant by that, I think, is the alignment once you've uncovered and hopefully discovered the principles, right? How do you help put the guardrails on meetings and conversations? How do you put the kind of the bumper lanes in place so that people stay headed the general right direction?
Yeah, I think as a practical question, you share principles, or first principles, right, are key, right? We talk about landing a rocket, right, from the moon back to Earth. And, it's not just a matter of like, hey, let's just, throw some materials, aluminum or this or that, right? And it's, we have to figure, what are the first principles? Well, gravity, these are all these key elements. And I think building intention into things like meetings, into one-on-one conversations. And it doesn't have to be all mapped out, right? Where we have it all buttoned up and, make it a show. It's the first principles could be shared wisdom, right? Which is leading with the question, deep empathy, right? Which has to do with another principle, ours, make others the mission. But these kinds of things that help set the course. And I think more specifically for, meetings is allowing space for brave conversations to happen, right? You could call it brave space, where people feel inclined to share and that they're not punished overtly, or in a subtle way, right? That they feel genuinely like, wow, I can share, because that's where the goodness is, where it's a bit messy. Scott Belsky, he's the head of Adobe, chief product officer. He talks about being on the edge of reason as a collective group, right? And and I think what he's expressing is, so we have to kind of be in a bit of a fuzzy, call it an art zone, that we haven't been as much in, if we speak traditionally about how business or leadership has operated in the past, or culture, right? A lot of it has been very oriented toward a scientific, have the answers approach, efficiency, effectiveness. But this is where that wave of co-creation, it's not only possible, it actually, if you look at a company like Nike, right? We spent time with them, and you could actually chart this based on the data as to the difference between their investment in culture. And it's in the investment in the things that we're talking about, which is, okay, so practically speaking, about meetings, give people 5 to 10 minutes to check in, right? And it could be the one-on-one meeting or in that group meeting. And it's a small thing, right? Maybe it's a 10 or 15 to 20% investment of time. But what we see is, if you look at the comparative performance between Nike, and we've charted this based on both internal culture and external perception of culture. So we partner with a company called Verve, and they actually chart this with customers. And they ask them the question is, how much belonging do you feel with your shoes, right, or with the products you're using, and then they can gauge essentially external culture, right, of impact of. And so with Nike, the difference between them and Asics and Skechers and other brands is not just like 3x or 4x, it's 10x difference as far as performance, but based on just like a 15 to 20% consistent investment in culture. And then also with the first principles, we talked about it before. They're very clear. There's actually a guy named Rob, I forget his last name, but when they were early makings, Phil Knight, they were doing their thing, business-wise. And Rob just one day starts to intuit these principles about Nike's future. You've probably seen these online, but he starts posting them on people's doors. And the historian of Nike, he went around and asked people, was this real? Was it just Rob being Rob, or was it like something that was meaningful? And people started to confirm it. They said, yeah, he actually intuited what the first principle, and you could say the first principles of their future culture. That's a little interstellar of us, right, to go there. But that idea that like your future self, but the future self of the culture, but those are powerful for grounding people. And it's obvious. I mean, Nike's success explains a lot, right? We did that kind of work at Apple as well, and it was not a fixer-upper. There was not as much pain as with the Dell experience. But theirs, it was simple. It was like, hey, we have pain points when we go in new territories, AirPods, Apple Watch, the VR, the headset at Apple. Literally, the secret lab was right next door to my office. And so I'd see people go in and come out really excited. And, these are things that occasionally get friction, right, or struggles. But the challenge for Apple was, how do we go from thinking different? And that could be, in the extreme, that could be an individual approach to really working different together and connecting dots horizontally as well as vertically. And, to their credit, they, took it to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of things that are occurring to me while you're talking about this. I can't remember what book I read, but it was, more philosophical in nature, and discussed, that one of the unique traits of human beings that separated us from animals in the beginning was our ability to create things that didn't already exist in nature. Like the earliest forms of art that we find are things that, depicted things that didn't really exist yet. And that's, one of our abilities is to create things that don't already exist. And so having almost like a disincentive, sometimes incentives get us really channeled towards one way of thinking and limit our creativity to solve problems. And so being careful of the incentives you put in an organization that might stifle the creativity for the future, right?
Yeah, that too. And it could be, are there ways to tie this to a team success, right? To the impact that the team is having. And we've seen that, I've seen this work really well when they can, companies can solve for a reward system that it does both, right? It's an and answer. If you look at Apple, it's teamwork, innovation, and results. Those things are all important. The tension that lies between them is, it's a good ecosystem.
I always love asking guests, you've had a life of experience, and you've kind of isolated, in some cases, some of these principles that you personally put into motion over your career, or, some of them you learned along the way. What advice would you give to the 21-year-old Chris Deaver, knowing everything that you've known now?
Well, I'll caveat that with I share some advice with my son occasionally, and I went on a coaching spree with him one time. This is like 45 minutes of like just heavy coaching related to stuff. It was emotional. There were some things going on, with his life, but he's a great kid. So we end off, and we hug each other. I tell him I love him. I go to my room. He comes back later. He knocks on my door, and he's like, "Hey, can you coach my friends?" And I said, I don't know. I said, why? And he goes, well, they were listening to the whole thing. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, he had his AirPods in, and they were listening apparently.
Oh my gosh.
Really? Because there was a lot of like, I mean, say personal, but it was, it was some serious stuff. And I said, oh, can you keep me posted next time that I'm on, on a live mic?
You're live streaming to TikTok.
Exactly. But yeah, I'm finding, I would say like largely it'd be like, keep going, right? Sometimes the struggles that we see feel so overwhelming. There's so much going on, right? Where they could feel like, where's my place in the world? I keep thinking, I go back in my mind to like Walt Disney when he was younger. He would go to the train station in Kansas City and or Missouri, and the one to LA. He'd stand there and he thought, all my dreams, somebody else is dealing. Like it's already been done. And that was his like, call it a pre-regret or a feeling of just, kind of that pain, right? And now he turned that pain into power. But I think part of it is like, don't get discouraged. We have a mental health crisis, but to simplify it down and boil it down, I'd say find a way to, yes, be successful, but also to create shared dreams, right? It's not just a dream board, it's a shared dream board. How do you be brave, with those you love? And like Charlie Munger talks about this with Warren Buffett. I mean, they're a classic example. Like they've been brave together for a long time. And it's just, it's unbelievable, right? The results they get from that. Just imagine what you can do, right? With, in building with others. I think that's something to, we haven't explored it enough on the educational front. We have not explored enough on the business front. On a personal level, that will unlock so many things in your world. It will unlock your dreams and accelerate and amplify things like you wouldn't believe. It's just amazing.
This is awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation. For people to dive deeper into this, they can read your book, Brave Together, Lead by Design, Spark Creativity and Shape the Future with the Power of Co-Creation. I love it. Any other direction you want to point our listeners to for resources?
Yeah, thanks. I just add a website, www.bravecore.co. We've got a lot of resources on there and content that can help power what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for this great conversation. A lot of wisdom.
Thank you, Adam. I've enjoyed it. It's been fun.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.